I'm Jason Klein and with OnGrid Ventures, and I'm very pleased to be with you here today. This actually is the second time I've moderated a panel with a version of this theme. The theme today is billion-dollar opportunities in local. And for those of you that are street fight regulars, I don't know how many there are, but in 2013, I did a panel with the title, The Billion-Dollar Opportunities in Hyperlocal. And what's interesting is contrasting how things have changed in those 4 years. When we first came up with that notion of creating $1 billion in value from an early stage or mid-stage company, in 2013, there was one company. Waze had been bought by Google for $1 billion, and that was fresh in everyone's minds. And in the street fight universe, in the past few years, there's been seven more companies that are created that are worth $1 billion or more by my count, and I'm probably missing some of them. Yext is public with $1 billion valuation on about $124 million in revenue and no profit. Nextdoor, they came out of nowhere, raised around, and now valued at $1.1 billion after raising $100 million. Yelp went public, now has a $2.5 billion market cap. OpenTable was bought by Priceline for $2.6 billion. As you notice, the numbers are getting larger. Walmart bought Jet for $3.3 billion. And Match Group, and I consider that kind of local or geo because you can't really, all dating is basically done around local, basically, around finding people around you. And so I put it in that category. That's got a market cap of $5 billion. And of course, the granddaddy is Uber, which obviously is critical to making local transportation work better at $62 billion market cap. So this seems to be a pretty productive area for investment. And so I think a good lead-in to have two strong venture capitalists with us today talking about where we can create the next billion-dollar opportunity. Let me ask each of them to introduce themselves and particularly talk about the kinds of things that your firm invests in, how big the investments are and so forth. Chris?
Sure. Great to see everyone out in the audience today. I'm coming from Revolution. We're a DC-based venture firm founded by Steve Case. We've got two sets of funds, an early-stage venture firm that invests $3 to $10 million into single-digit million-dollar revenue businesses. I work out of our growth stage funds, where we write anywhere from $15 to $75 million checks into really growth stage companies. And we love consumer, we love enterprise technology, and we're looking for the next billion-dollar company.
And Charlie?
Hi, Charlie O'Donnell. Can you tell which one of us is the VC in Brooklyn? I run a seed stage fund, $15.5 million fund, basically PowerPoint stage, prototype stage, the earliest money in, and the kinds of outcomes that make my economics work are $250 million outcomes or more, which is sort of the average tech M&A acquisition. I'll invest in any sector as long as the company's in and around New York City.
So it's great to have these two very different VCs in very different areas join us, one making much larger bets and one more in the early stage, and also I think the only VC firm located in Brooklyn.
No, we have two now.
We have two, okay.
Yeah, Notation is
great. And maybe one of the only people in the room who biked here to get to today's session. What I wanted to do for the remainder of our time is talk through some of the various segments that are within the street fight universe, and just get your perspective on whether they'd be good areas going forward to invest in, and both for your fund, but also in general as a billion-dollar opportunity. And I'll ask you in each case to kind of give it a code, give it green light, red light, or yellow light, just so we can tally that up. And let's start first with the whole area of local services on demand. So here you have the granddaddy of companies, Uber, drivers on demand. But also both your firms have got investments in this arena. Chris, you have Handy and Spare Foot, and Charlie, you've got Homer. And so, what's your take on going forward, the on-demand services? A good area or not?
Yeah, it's probably a yellow for us. I think there'll be selective categories where there can be very big companies built, but we picked the winner in home cleaning, which we were lucky to do. Sparefoot's doing the same thing around self-storage and being able to aggregate the small mom and pops onto a marketplace where one can transact, now getting into services. But I think that there are such big incumbents in the space that are well funded that's going to be hard to find players at scale. So for us, scale is important here, and being able to execute locally is how you actually make money. So it's hard to find that winning model across a lot of geos where it eventually will lead to a company that has real profits.
I think the key to this area is making sure the microeconomics of the transactions work, considering particularly the cost of labor. I think there are too many models out there where you figure out what consumers want to pay for something, you figure out what your overhead is, and the remainder is, oh, and if we can get this low level of labor person a couple of bucks, we'll try and make that work and skirt whatever labor laws we can. And people have realized that, like, that's probably not gonna fly over the long term, and B, it actually creates a lot of churn, because if you don't treat your employees well, they're not gonna stick around, they're gonna move on to some other offering. And people forget about the cost of actually onboarding the people doing the work. When you guys are training a Handy employee, like, you're giving them some equipment, you're vetting them. There's a real cost to bring somebody on, and if they don't, if the job isn't meaningful economically to them, they're not going to stick around, and so you've wasted that cost. That's why one of the businesses that I've invested in, Homer, started with the premise of how do we make the economics work from the perspective of an individual bike delivery person. They're all W-2 employees. They all get workers' comp, medical benefits. So our churn, considering the background and skill set of those employees, is actually relatively much lower than the industry. And it actually makes our service better because we can route them, unlike an Uber. We can tell them where to go. We get more deliveries per rider per hour. So our economics are better, even though we did the more difficult thing up front based on economics.
A lot of these companies are basically app-driven. And is apps red light, green light, or yellow light for you as investors? Because some people are getting skittish in that.
Very much a red light. No,
Yeah.
I think people have only so much attention and maybe one or two screens of phone space to put things, and so the rush to add more things is getting harder. You probably see that in mobile games being the only one that's really growing like a weed right now, but. For Handy, it's a nice one because there's recurring, behavior there. You want to book someone every month. Starbucks, another great example of an app that's sticky, right? But if you don't have that repeat behavior, you might be able to get someone to download it, but then someone to keep using it is much harder.
Agree?
Short panel, I don't feel the need to answer every question.
Second sector, I'll call it SMB marketing. A lot of panels here. You've got companies like Reach Local, which was represented, Hearst Local Edge, Gatehouse, Propel, Radius 8. And so this is obviously a big market. I think one of the speakers had talked about it, SaaS software as I think you said either a $10 billion business globally. So what do you think, SMB marketing?
Sure. I think the hard thing there is a lot of these companies, it's really hard to figure out an SMB sale. It is one of the hardest things in the world to walk into a pizzeria and try and sell tech, right? You sell tech into Verizon, you talk to the CIO, that person may or may not buy your thing, but at least you know you're talking to the right person. Who knows if it's Uncle Joey that makes the decision in the pizzeria or what have you, and that's just a totally different skill set, buying that team. Companies like Yelp and Yext have been incredibly successful doing that, but a lot of the startups that I see, I'm not sure, while I've backed a lot of pre-product teams, in this space, if you haven't completed a sale, that is the big gap. And you know, if you need a huge network first before you can sell your first item, it's going to be really, really tough to get there, and your proposition is not going to be that interesting to investors.
So red light?
Well, if somebody can sell, but mostly red.
Red, okay.
And I'd say for me, you know, it's yellow light, and only because if you've gotten to the stage of where I'm looking at, then the sky's the limit because you're probably the dominant player in that category. So if you can get past, you know, the first few folks who need funding, you get to me, you're 30, 40 million in revenue. That means you really own something well in the ecosystem of SMB, and you've clearly gotten a sales model that works and is repeatable and scalable, and that's really kind of where we're coming in, is to throw on fuel to the fire there. So I think it really becomes, well, what's the sales engine look like, and is that something that scales and gets you from 30 to 300 million potentially?
Just to toss one more thing into this sort of local stack, and when you're figuring out who's your end customer and what is their budget and where do they spend money, your average local retailer, like, basically almost doesn't even have a marketing budget, right? You have to convince them to take money out of something else. I think the more interesting plays are companies where, for example, I have an investment in a company called Access Bazaar, and they are a wholesale purchasing platform for SMBs. So if you can help the bodega down the street, the small restaurant or whatever, make smarter purchasing at scale and lower their costs and take a small cut, a small bodega is spending $40,000 a month on their inventory. So even a small cut of that is way more money than you can ever get them to pay for, you know, an upgrade to Yelp or Yext or what have you. So I think entrepreneurs should really be fishing around, you know, what other pools of money in this local stack can I be addressing, not just the kind of non-existent marketing stack.
I just note I'm an investor in a company called Cups, which some of you may know, which is kind of a network of independent coffee shops. And they started more as a consumer app, and they've evolved much more into being almost a purchasing platform and a B2B network of coffee shops. Let's talk third about local news and information. And I remember coming to Street Fight panels when it first got started, and you'd look out in the audience and you'd see an awful lot of salespeople from local newspapers and TV stations. And I don't know, do we have someone representing newspapers and TV here today? I think they've all been scared away, and everything has moved into digital. And but digital investment is kind of tough in this area. And what do you think? Would you invest in a local news aggregator or a local news creator?
I think it's super hard. I just had kind of a, not to change the color of the panel here, but I was just biking up from Gowanus, and for those of you who are on Twitter, might have seen that there were shots fired around the Barclays Center. And literally, I was crossing Atlantic and 4th when it happened and called 911, and it was a really bizarre experience to hear it and not see what was going on, and I just sort of got the hell out of there. But as soon as I felt like I was several blocks away, my immediate first thought was go to Twitter, right? Because there's going to be other people in the area, there's critical mass, there's sort of an accuracy issue, right? So the first tweet I saw was like, oh, it's a false alarm. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad I called and said something, right? And 10 minutes later, by the time I got here, somebody's like, no, somebody actually has been shot. Who knows what the situation is now? But like, how do you compete with that infrastructure and liquidity and all that sort of stuff? Like, statistically, there was somebody else in the area. And in fact, somebody, it was a Verge editor or somebody with a little blue check in my feed was in and around the same area too. I don't know how you rebuild that. And that's what is needed for local, right? If you're talking about high quality journalism, which like we don't see enough of, I think there are potentially some interesting, maybe not hugely scalable models, but people tend to care about like big picture stuff, and then like, is there gunfire on my street corner? And that bottom half of that, I just think is incredibly difficult to replicate.
Sounds like a red light. Chris?
Yeah, 2 words, red light.
Okay, doesn't take much more explanation than that. Fourth segment is the whole world of kind of geo, ad tech, and data. So we had a really terrific panelists here from PlaceIQ, Foursquare, Cubic, and others covering this area. And it's still not clear if it's created a lot of unicorns just yet, but certainly with the contention of Foursquare that 80% of the location data a few years ago was just basically wrong. It seems like there's an opportunity to really improve on that and change the nature of how geodata is used. Do you think this is a good area for investment?
Yeah, it's something, I do personally a lot in consumer and retail, and getting to the customer and understanding the customer is front and center for any consumer retail business. Geo-tagging and understanding, proximity beacons in stores. I mean, these are all hot topics for our companies and potential companies. I think the people supplying that technology haven't found quite a way to give the full platform to the retailer yet. And so it feels like until someone's built that full platform of how to bring, at least in retail, those stores into the 21st century shopping experience, it's going to be hard to sell kind of one-off pieces of a solution. It's going to have to be something that's more all-encompassing around customer data, both tracking them in and out of the store, online and in physical environments, building that CRM. And if someone can build and do more of that, I think there could be a real business that gets built there. But individual point solutions would, just to me, harder to scale into something big without being part of a bigger platform.
Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, particularly around local commerce. And I found myself trying to figure out, a friend of mine wasn't feeling well, and so I said, do you need anything? And they're like, I really want honey, because I had like a throat. And I was like, does Dwayne Reed have honey? I was like, I don't really know whether Dwayne Reed has honey or not. Right. But like, that should have been an easier find.
That's right.
Right? Does the Dwayne Reed down the street have honey? And like, the data's in there somewhere, and it's not clear like whose incentive it is going to be to like fish it out. And you kind of wonder like, at some point Google's going to tell me, or Apple or whatever. I think the interfaces around search are going to have a major impact around this, because at some point whoever figures this out is just basically going to be selling that data to Amazon, Google, Facebook, or Apple. That's basically like, as a consumer, who you're going to be interfacing with, and you're just going to ask whether it's text or voice or whatever, those platforms. And then anybody that has data is, if you want scale, you're not going to build a consumer product around it. You're just going to like plug into those platforms. And I wonder whether or not that shrinks the ultimate economic opportunity, because Google's going to take its pound of flesh.
Right. Interesting, Foursquare started as a consumer app and then really pivoted, as you heard today, to being much more of a data supplier of geodata, and which gets to the whole question of, it's basically ad tech. I mean, a lot of this area is ad tech, and I'm putting you both on the spot. I mean, your firm was founded by, a publishing and advertising maven, Steve Case, and you're located, in certainly one of the hearts of ad tech, and I'm sure you've seen a million different opportunities. Would you invest in ad tech as a sector now? Is it high on your list or not?
Yeah, I mean, we just had this conversation with both Steve and Ted Leonsis, who pioneered a lot of what is now ad tech today. And we're scared to death of the space. Not to say there won't be big companies that get built there, but everything is going through, was it 60% of shopping now goes through Amazon as the first point of search. Google, owns it all, right? In a lot of ways, the move to voice search is gonna move the needle even further in a way that we don't know how that's gonna work. And so, as Google becomes more like Siri and Alexa, how does that impact ad tech? And will there be display ads? Will they matter anymore? How will you get to the top of the ranking if there's not a ranking? So there are things there where maybe someone will figure out how to crack that code, wherever the code is yet. But I don't think we know what the code looks like quite yet. So it's an area that we're very wary of.
I think if you're going to build anything, you really need to build something that you are sure that one of these larger players needs in the competition with each other, not as a standalone. And I think that's why ad tech, you tend to see a lot of repeat founders, because they sell their company to Google, and then they realize, oh, yeah, but the thing that Google never quite figured out is this. So I'm going to go build that, and I know I'm just going to come back in 3 or 4 years or however, and resell my company, and I have the contacts or whatever. To start out fresh in the ad tech business when you don't have those connections, those insights, I think it's really hard.
Let's just hit a few more segments quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions. How about the whole mapping arena? Waze, obviously both Google has gone into it. Mapbox was a presenter. You think that's a good area?
Yeah, no, I mean, Mapbox is in our backyard, and it's a company we certainly keep an eye on. They've had a lot of traction, and I think that there clearly is a world where people are using that to guide not only, how they shop, where they're going, is there honey at Duane Reade, but Google Maps has become the center of a lot of universes there. Will there be others to be successful? Potentially, or at least they might be companies that get built to a size and scale that a Google needs to buy them or an Amazon wants to buy them because they also need to get close to that. So I think it's probably yellow for us, but it's certainly a bigger part of how people are interacting with the world around them relative to where we were 5 or 10 years ago.
Key to this is layering on good quality data, and can you get data that other people can't? It's easy to think like, what do you mean map? Like we have Google Maps, why do we need new maps, right? But the way you as a human interface with a map is very different than the self-driving vehicle interfaces with a map and needs a map of, how to read a particular intersection, or a visual map of where construction might be occurring that changes the way the road looks, or a map of dry crops that a farmer needs, or something along those lines. So there's a company out of the UrbanX Accelerator that I forget how to pronounce it. It's sounds like Consensus, but that's not what it is. They have a platform where you can feed your own data into maps. Like if you're a real estate developer, you say, oh, okay, well, I have a traffic data, and then I have air rights data, and all this sort of stuff to try and figure out where to buy. So making maps smarter, I think, is the key.
Why don't we open it up to the audience? Any questions for our panelists? Is there a mic? Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. My question is, with everything that's been talked about in this conference, I guess in your perspective, what's kind of still the next thing? Where is it going to be more product, or is it just service? I know that's a very general question, but I feel like we've been talking about location, mapping, data. But I'm just, curious to know from both of your perspective, what's your hunch for the next thing?
Are you a founder or potential founder?
So I'm working on a virtual reality and 360 video startup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because usually when I hear people ask me what's the next thing, it's people who are
Wanting to
start something in that next
yes,
thing.
I want to.
And I think historically, VCs are really bad at predicting what the next thing is. And either they predict the wrong next thing, or they're 10 years off, in which case you can't fund your startup long enough to wait for it to happen. So, I would be more focused on what are the big problems. And, I think the problems are more obvious than the solutions. Like in a local level, we have housing problems, we have logistics problems, and we have environmental issues, and all those types of things are big problem sets. Food in the food supply line is a big problem set. What the solutions are, I have no idea.
But I think the thing that we're talking a lot about at Revolution is just the power of data and having the internet everywhere to, again, cliche, but this whole mix of big data and AI to drive better decision making, whether that's you, the customer, whether that's me, the retailer, giving you product, whether that's the farmer and what crops to plant and how to water them. But I think that mix of data and being able to put it in the cloud and then crunch that data to tell you how to do something better, it's going to look in a lot of different forms. But if I was starting a company right now, it would be somewhere in that mix to try to pick a piece of some value chain and say, I'm going to bring data here where it's not today, and really own that. Because we're starting to see the little AI guys become very big AI guys very quickly.
And I'll just add, I would say both information and services, because you hold your phone in your hand, and there's still a lot of things that you can do, but there's a lot more things that you can't do very well. It still does a very poor job of kind of thinking ahead and where you might be going and what you might want, and feeding you things that it can predict. And in the world of AI and data, that's all much more possible today, and these things just have to be built and put into place.
I'll actually throw out one thing in terms of the next thing. $1 billion startup that got created with sort of an intense, local feel, Shake Shack, right? And why did Shake Shack succeed, and what does it mean for local? Well, part of it is the experience of going and the customer service experience. I'm an investor in a couple of brick and mortar plays. One is The Wing, women's professional networking space. Another is Ample Hills, the ice cream shop. And if you're in Brooklyn, you've probably been to an Ample Hills. And there's an experience there that I think one of the reasons why a lot of retailers have failed is they don't provide a better experience than just shopping for something on the internet. So I'm still open to doing brick and mortar plays where the experience of actually going in is worth paying for and worth spending time in.
Great. Charlie, Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us.